Everyone to our last attire seminar of the quarter. And so for those of you who are new to attire, it's our humor interdisciplinary seminar series that take place every Thursday at noon. And attire, the name is inspired from a very popular tea in the Senegambia that promotes conviviality and just camaraderie, and really it's a space for us to discuss intellectual ideas and to just think together as a community from the continent outward. So today I have the honor of introducing our guest, Bridget Thompson, and she is an accomplished filmmaker. And I think I'm just going to read her bio before, because it's a lot. And yeah, so Bridget Thompson is an independent filmmaker renowned for her documentary films on South African social history and culture. Her works have been showcased globally on various platforms, including television, educational programs, museums, exhibitions, and international film festivals. Bridget has served on prestigious juries and taught cinema at film schools and universities. With an interdisciplinary approach, she brings together artists, scholars, musicians, writers, filmmakers, and activists in her work. Bridget is currently developing feature film scripts under the theme Going Beyond Guns, Gangs, and Action. She has also served on the UNESCO Slave Root Scientific Committee and founded the Arts Ubuntu Trust. So please join me in welcoming Bridget Thompson to our home here. You can clap. And I also forgot to introduce myself. I'm Fanny Tsanogo, doctoral fellow at Humor here. So I'm just going to share my screen. We're going to dive right in.
Thank you very much, Fanny, for welcoming me, and to Dominique and Sandile and Joy, who all facilitated me being here. Thank you. I'm going to give you just briefly a very different perspective on my bio. It's a bit more flattering than I think what I supplied, but anyway, thank you for talking it up. But I was born in deep apartheid as a white South African in the Eastern Cape, and I was born in an educated family, but with deep ignorance about society around me. So from our small village, we used to travel to the nearby town, in Williamstown, for my mother to go to Checkers to buy groceries. Our town was so small, there wasn't even a Checkers. We would pass Sandile's grave. And every 6 months, she would drive us to East London, where we used to have our hair cut, go to the dentist, get a new pair of shoes, and so on. You know, these things weren't available in our little village. And we would pass Ntabozoko, the mountain the hill really, where Mkai used to declaim his poetry from, where he lived in the last years of his life. But these things were kind of vague to me. And to cut a long story short, I came to university here at UCT, studied African history and industrial sociology, and my mind was turned 180 degrees. I discovered that there was a world of knowledge beyond the Shakespeare, Michelangelo, which my parents had books about and I read about as a child and so on. And it really blew my mind. And at the same time, I joined the struggle, which also blew my mind, because I now became one with my generation, which is really the 76th generation. And so I became a student of my society, and I was constantly looking for answers, and I started to explore those answers through documentary filmmaking. And one of the documentary films I made was on Govan Mbeki, I was very compelled to do this film about him because I wanted to understand who he was, what his values were. When I first met him, he said to me, "Are you the child of the farmer from Kentani district or the doctor from Adruchra?" I said, "No, actually, the farmer from Kentani was my grandfather, who had died before I was born." And he said, "Oh, I knew him. A wonderful gentleman. He spoke excellent Xhosa." I told him an anecdote about buying some cows from him when Roletsa was a baby and so on. So this started to fill in the gaps of, or started to expand my what I came to call my sort of white cultural Bantustan of the mind. But much of I had a beautiful 10 years in which I knew Umgov and filmed him and spent time with him, but he never really properly answered the questions that I asked him. He would answer them, or he would answer them with stories, which were very challenging and really exercised my mind. But he didn't articulate a philosophy of the knowledge that he carried. And it was only when by accident, he used to speak about this artist that he was at university with, Stereo. And he admired him and he loved him. And Stereo had introduced him to radical politics and so on and so forth. And coincidentally, I also got to know Jane Gould Tabata, who also spoke about this artist who'd invited her to go to Paris with him when he left, and she hadn't gone. And Tabata, who became her lifelong partner, sort of declared his affection for her by hiding her passport, so she couldn't go with Ernest Mancoba to Paris and so on. And so one thing led to another, and I came to understand that Stereo was Ernest Mancoba, and that Ernest Mancoba was the same artist who'd invited Jane Gould to go to Paris, and that Ernest Mancoba was living in Paris. And I hadn't yet finished the film on Governor Mbeki, and so I was always looking for funds. And I went to the French embassy and I said, "Please, can you help me?" And they said, "Well, why should we help?" I said, "Well, this very important friend of Ernest Mancoba lives in Paris and I'd like to go and interview him." And then a year or so later, suddenly out of the blue, got this trip to Paris to go and interview Ernest Mancoba. And I was nearly finished the film on Governor Mbeki. And I thought, what do I do with this trip to Paris? I thought, no, it will be interesting. Let's go. Little did I know that 30 years later, that this encounter would change my mind, expand my intellect, and really give me a sense of the most important and profound values that come out of South Africa. And I was thinking this morning about a phrase that I've always loved from Michael Ondaatje's first book. It was a memoir about his family in Sri Lanka called Running in the Family. And he spoke about how his family was crazy. And they used to have love affairs which rainbowed over marriages. And I suddenly thought of that concept because, first of all, when the whole notion of the Rainbow Nation came on, many people were very critical and they said, there's no black in the rainbow is different stripes and different colors, it's not a mix-up. But then I came to understand through one of the artists that we've worked with over many years, and that was Sokaya Charles Nkosi, that in Zulu cosmology, the rainbow symbolizes hope. So I think that Ernest Mancoba's ideas rainbow over most of our ideas in South Africa, and they really do symbolize hope. So that was really just what I'd like to give you. I mean, there's many other things I could tell you about the encounter. Many other people have been involved in the learning. One of them is here with me today, Abdul Kader Ahmed, and we'll see his short film just at the end of my presentation, which captures some of the aesthetics that I've been trying to talk about. But now I'm going to just go into a more formal discussion, talking specifically about his aesthetics. I'm not going to repeat what was in the paper. I presume you may have had access to it, you may have read it, but I'm going to concentrate on his values. Sorry, we're a little bit slow with the slides. This is actually my very first encounter with Ernest Mancoba was when he was given an honorary doctorate at the University of the Western Cape, and I went to film the graduation. And this saying of his, which was part of his speech, he wasn't there in person. It was the acceptance speech was read out by Jane Tabata, but he faxed it from the Louvre in Paris, of all places. And I was moved to tears by this, and I think it has continued to guide the work that I do and continue to be an important understanding of, in some ways, the essence of his message. I think you've all read it, so I'm not going to repeat it. And then you'll see some pictures of me in conversation with him, which was 30 years ago, when I looked slightly different. We could move on to those pictures if you've all had a chance. That's Ernest Mancoba, and on the left is his son Wonga, and on the right is me. And that's me and him. So, okay, so now I'm going to start talking about his aesthetics. The universal spiritual values that are expressed in the following works, and I'm going to talk about the ancestor and the Madonna, are sourced in the cradle of humanity and link all Afro-descendant peoples wherever they are in the world at the same time as they link all of humanity. And this is his painting called The Ancestor, which you're going to know a lot better by the end of this session. Le Ancêtre. This oil painting is apparently abstract, but closer scrutiny reveals distinct figurations centered around a totemic shape, akin to a Kota reliquary figure. The painter Ernest Mancoba was born in South Africa and died in Paris. From 1938, he lived in Europe, often experiencing isolation and alienation, at the same time drawing from his subconscious and memory to explore African spirituality. The values he learnt about African spirituality and humanity at his mother's knee are encapsulated in the Nguni proverb, Umuntu ngamuntu ngabanye ngebantu, often described in short as Ubuntu, and it means a person is a person by and because of other people. This person-centered approach to human relations is at the core of African spirituality, a spirituality which is rooted in human interactions and is guided by respect for those who came before, ancestors. Mancoba comments on these values and implores the world to take cognizance of them before conflict causes a global implosion. During his youth in colonial South Africa, he had, along with the fine minds of his generation, explored all the ideological possibilities for changing and improving the world. In particular, they explored how to overturn the colonial system. He continued these discussions in Europe amongst peers in the Cobra movement and others like Sheikh Anta Diop, who were directly involved, and with others like Sheikh Anta Diop, who were directly involved in the anti-colonial struggle. Having been imprisoned outside Paris by the Nazis during the Second World War, he was acutely aware of the human cost of a world war. At the end of his long life, he said there were only two values he needed as a guide to life, Ubuntu and the Christian saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Unpacking the painting reveals that it carries a distinctly 21st century vision, rooted in an African heritage. It overturns the Renaissance principles of painting, which created a despotic eye, viewing the human body through a vanishing point in short perspective. Notably, the Cubists, inspired by African sculpture, formally challenged this way of seeing. In Mancoba's opinion, the Cubists didn't grasp the spiritual message, the content of the African sculpture which inspired them. It is our contention that Mancoba solved what he called the problem of perspective in a remarkable way in his paintings, by bringing together both the form and the content. He suggested the terms for a human renaissance using African spirituality as a guide. He did this by reintroducing a body into the center of the pictorial plane, a totemic ancestral figure which fills the space. He reinstated the sacred and social in art through using this body to symbolize a common human ancestor. He depicts the people of the world through the patterns and colors of the painting, all with an equal relationship to the central human ancestor and all equally accessible to the eye. We could go on to the picture of the Kota. Mancoba's words on the possibility of the Kota reliquary figures inspiring the central totemic figure of his painting provides another layer with which to interpret the spiritual message, and I'm quoting from Mancoba. The Kota effigy has a strange resemblance with the central figure in my painting, not only formally, but also as to the destination it was supposed to have. It stood traditionally on top of a basket box containing the bones of the deceased ancestor, whom it somehow represented and defended in the world of the living. It also contained different sorts of ritual objects, like shells and certain plants used magically. The sculpture and the box had a symbolic meaning and function, which maintains together the teachings and the experience of the tribe, and it gave a spiritual depth to rites, without which these would risk in a later context to become mere folklore. This striking representation standing on the reliquary would also be seen as an effort to prolong and accompany the spiritual influence of the ancestor, not only in the remembrance of future generations, but in the consciousness these will have of themselves. Can move on. I'd just like to mention that not only the film that we're showing in a while, which was produced by Abdul Kader, who's here, but also a South African master weaver, Joseph Ndlovu, interpreted the painting in a 3 meter by 2 meter. Sorry, we can go back to sorry, forward.
Is it this?
Next one.
This.
That one. This looks just like a painting, but in fact it's a weaving produced by master weaver Joseph Ndlovu. And the Art and Voluntary Trust commissioned this and donated it to the Constitutional Court so that a work of Mancoba's could be in a public place in South Africa. And it's been received very beautifully. And fine arts lecturer, the late Mqinine Sobopha at the University of Fort Hare, the alma mater of Mancoba Mbeki Mandela, has written a beautiful monograph on the ancestor and the role of the ancestor, as has Dr. Elsa Miles, Mancoba's biographer. I was going to carry on and talk about this work, The African Madonna, which, but I see we're running a little bit short of time and I don't want you to miss the film. So I'll just say very briefly, this was his very first artwork, produced in 1929. And I think if we go deeper into it, we can actually see similar concerns already expressed in that work. It was innovative because he used yellow wood, an indigenous South African wood. It was innovative in that he modeled the Madonna on an African woman. And although at the time it was described by a fellow South African sculptor, Lippie Lipschitz, as boring, 80 years after it was made, an image of it in a poster stunned and surprised young rural African women who were delighted to see a depiction of the Madonna as an African woman. I'm going to stop there. There was a little bit more I was going to say about the Madonna, but I am conscious of time. We can come back to that if we need to. So I think now we can show the film.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Okay, I'll leave to fiddle with that, and I'll add the piece that I wasn't going to add about the Madonna. I've just got to find my place again. So the power and significance of this challenge to the depiction of the Madonna and Jesus as white, often blue-eyed, is explored in a monograph by arts writer Ati Mongezelela Georgia, who cites his own family's experience of subjugation by an image of a white Jesus. At the entrance of my grandparents' house hangs an old tapestry fixed to the wall. It appears to have been there forever, and its colours are beginning to fade. It depicts a blue-eyed Jesus Christ amidst a group of sheep with a calf gently resting on his chest. The picture is a reference to the books of Isaiah. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arm, he will gather the lambs and carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. Growing up in a Christian home, it was customary that in our nightly prayers, for example, owing to my grandparents' command, to kneel down and address prayers facing the tapestry from a low-angle perspective. When an inkling of joy abounded, my granny, A rather coy whisper of expressed gratitude would leave her cheery lips in the most discreet of ways. It was customary that such images take the more visible spaces of the home, especially at the entrance, serving more purposes than mere decor. We unquestionably accepted the narrative, mindless of the worrying undertone such motifs reinforced in a world structured by spatio-temporal logics of anti-blackness. In a racist world, white people are conceived as prosthetic gods and blacks, their obedient minions. As the book of Ephesians urged, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. The legacy of slavery created a reasoning that couldn't disintegrate Black people from slaves, whether free or not. The Black wasn't like everyone else, a sinner prone to redemption here and now, but was the prototype of sin whose redemption could only be possible outside the world. This becomes interesting when we consider the production of divine objects and images as symbolic representations of the colonial church ideology. We can understand how significant Mancoba's act was in 1929 in modelling the Madonna on an African woman. I'd like to mention here Professor Ntongela Masilela, through whom I met Sandile and Gidi, and whose work has been very important in understanding the broader context of which to appreciate Ernest Mancoba's work. His concept of the new African movement is really very important to understand the panoply, the architecture of the intellectuals, not only Black intellectuals, but primarily Black intellectuals from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century, who explored what modernity meant. But as Professor Masilela said, Christianity was adopted in South Africa as the congenial face of colonialism, and this is clearly Mancoba's approach. So clearly, implicitly in his African Madonna, there is a critique of the dominant symbolism. So we can see a clear continuity of concerns in the work of Mancoba at 25, at 65, and at 98. He engaged a lifelong struggle to express himself, at times in extremely difficult circumstances. It took courage from the example of the Inuit, who made art in extremely challenging material circumstances, as he said. They used feathers and they used fishbone and they used all that they could get to have expressed in a tangible way something to be left for the coming generation. He left us, through his paintings and through his ideas and philosophy, a reminder of the most ancient human values which could guide the world, and suggested that if these were not adhered to, we might in fact destroy the world. And I think as the years unfold from the time that he lived, those dangers become more and more apparent to us. They're so acute in the world at the moment. I can play the video from my computer if that would be any.
To access it. We'll try to share online, but there seems to be some issues in terms of the, like, my computer. Okay. I tried to like switch to video, but it wasn't. It's when it's a pity for people online. It is a pity. Is there sound? Yeah. Showing the PowerPoint we see.
things which were made by black men long time ago, and which were speaking to us today, and which were a heritage which belongs to all mankind, a heritage which we must carry for our survival. Because if we lose contact with this, then we risk to disappear, and therefore we might be in a situation in which future societies will dig in the ground and says, these ones here, like these dinosaurs, they could not find a way to continue this beautiful thing. And therefore they've disappeared. Because it's a message, a heritage of trial and error.
Trial and error, as he said. We apologize for the technical difficulties in terms of the sound and sharing the video, especially for the people online. But hopefully they can access the documentary when it's the full documentary when it's out. I don't know if Bridget, you want to add something about the film before we dive into questions, or should we just dive into it?
We can dive into questions.
Okay.
Could you hear properly?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us these very insightful ideas around Ernest Mancoba's epistemology. And I think for me, when I was reading your paper, the paper that you shared, that was very extensive in terms of your thoughts on him and his way of producing art. I wondered, like, what would be the difference between producing art and producing knowledge about art, like as you are doing right now with your colleague who is here present. And after seeing the film, I think that became quite obvious, but I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your cinematic vision and just the methodology behind the way that you thought about representing his art. And yeah, just
well, the documentary that I made about him, which isn't this one, this was one that Abdul Qadir made for an exhibition, was in some ways a fairly traditional documentary. Who are you? What's happening? And it's called Ernest Mancoba at Home, and it tracks his journey from Paris back to South Africa for the first time in 56 years. But spending time with him making the film, and then he stayed with me for 2 weeks and saw him again when he came back to Cape Town, when the exhibition that he came back to South Africa for moved to Cape Town. I began to think about what he said, and then a few years later, when he died in 2002, this happened in '94. In 2002, when he died, we were busy making another series on music, and I felt I hadn't sufficiently honored his passing. So when we finished the series on music, I came up with the idea of doing an exhibition. And this was when the knowledge about his work started to unfold. I'd also just like to mention, as an aside, I have another colleague here with me, Lydia, who's sitting directly opposite me. I just wanted to mention you in the introductions. So with that, we formed the Art and Inventory Trust to explore more about his worldview, his aesthetic and his worldview. And in the process of putting that exhibition together, a process of learning started, because I didn't think too much about the paintings when I was filming them, I just filmed them. But a process of reflecting on them began when I was in the edit suite. And then in conversation with him, I went back to him and I said, it seems as if your paintings are paintings of mourning. And I felt that they reflect the mourning of him being in exile for so many years. And he said, Bridget, you must never forget my paintings are in the name of all humanity, not just my people in South Africa. And so I called the exhibition In the Name of All Humanity, the African spiritual expression of Ernest Mancoba. And some people struggle to understand why an African spiritual expression is one for the whole of humanity. But anyway, that's been one of the issues that has been, discussed in the time, from then until now. So it was the preparation of a catalogue for the exhibition which really made me think very carefully about his work, because I didn't have a formal art history training. And what I did is that I went to his words, and he would say something like, he really admired Charlie Chaplin, because Charlie Chaplin used the language of shadows, and because Charlie Chaplin used a language where he told the story on the body, and the body spoke to everybody, because he didn't use a verbal, dialogue. And then I thought, okay, well, what is he doing with the body? And then I realized he's doing the same thing with the ancestral figure at the center of his paintings. He's using that ancestral figure. He's telling the story on the ancestor's body. And if you go into the different paintings, they all have different stories around them. And those stories and the interpretation of those stories can be very closely related to the particular colors that he uses from the South African color palette. And then another thing, so I would hear what he said, because I'd made the documentary, I'd spoken to him, I'd had conversations with him. He repeated his ideas, often in very cryptic sentences, even just in little sayings. And then I would go and look at the work, hearing what he said about particular things, and then try and deepen the understanding that way. So that was the method that I used. And I'm very glad that I didn't have a formal art history training, because it would have been a formal Western art history training. And I wouldn't have been able to use this method. And I would have approached paintings from another way, which many people do. But it allowed me it provided me with keys to unlock what he was saying. One thing that he said, and it's in the documentary that I made, he said, when I'm painting, I allow what's in my subconscious to come up. And I thought to myself, well, what's in his subconscious? 33 years living in South Africa before he left South Africa. So what did he see? What did he know? And when we were preparing the exhibition, we went to find all the different things that he spoke about. We went to find the rock art, the stone tools, and so on and so forth. And I was just amazed to discover that they had the same colors as his paintings. And then I began to realize how profound his understanding of colors was. And there were writers in Europe who spoke about his incredible command of colors. But only when we began to compare those paintings to certain South African color palettes that are expressed in beadwork did we see he had this superb grasp of the different colors from the different parts of the country.
Thank you. I think I have a lot of thoughts in response to that, but I will open the floor for questions if there are any.
I would like to add something about
Please.
This. You see, Ernest Mancoba he was a philosopher, part of being an artist, incomprehended and in a wild. He left apartheid here, and he went in Europe where there was an apartheid walking with big boots, patients. So he uses one sentence, and that sentence is encrypted. You have to decode it.
Yeah.
He never spoke about direct language. Symbolism. And Bridget made an interview about him in Paris in more than 4 hours. But she didn't select the film. When we were making that film, I have to go through that interview. And the funny thing is that only 3 paintings that he did, he gave the names. There are others, they were like prisoners. He gave them numbers. You see, the prisoner, when you are in prison, you don't have and a name. You have a number 22, number 23. All of the other paintings, he gave them numbers, but the only 3 paintings was this, feeding the ancestor. Another one about his wife, when she passed away, he did another painting, and he took it. And the third one is about 1976, the youth, when it was the youth rebellion here. The youth protest. But indirectly, what is the important thing is this. I asked him what he means about the ancestors. Well, apart from what Bridget said, the quarter figure in the Zanzibar, but he tells us, you remember the film? When Shaka invaded the rest of the Yata war in Shaka Zulu about that, his grandmother and mother and himself as a young boy, they left, migrated. And they have to leave the grandmother behind to die.
Yeah.
So that is the first moment when you see the woman and the 2 children leave that place, and the grandmother is left behind, and she becomes part of the ancestors. And that indirectly, he uses what they call minimalistic version, following the tradition of the African art, like the khoisan and everything. When they paint the bit, it's a small thing, but it gives a bigger meaning. And he included himself in the paintings. I don't know if you saw him next to the painting you did. And he tells the story of South Africa about the discovery of gold, the First World War, Anglo-Boer War, the secession, the rebellion, and all these things. And in fact, that's what he says. It's a trial and error.
Okay.
Why is it trial and error? Why? Till now, thanks to idiots who still think that they are superior compared to the rest of the mortal. That is not kept, and is going to be action-reaction. We are going to distinguish ourselves. Yeah. And the people who will come after us, he says, when they find us, they say, those people, they do not know how to move the things. And directly, so it's a whole description. And all these paintings is not the painting that you have color. If you look carefully and study carefully, you see symbols. Yeah. The Europeans, they have one, not Europeans, but they call it the redneck. I call them the redneck. They have a painter called Pollock. Pollock is renowned all over the world. He preceded Pollock, but you cannot see him. Yeah. Number 2, in Europe himself, he was the ideologue who created the manifesto of the Black Cobra. But they don't mention, they call it the black dots of the cobra.
I think,
yeah. And there is a famous picture where at certain points in Paris, they took a picture of the cobra movement when he and his wife were not part of it.
Wow.
But later on came in the article. So now officially the cobra movement picture, he is not included, and his wife is not included. And he is the one who wrote the manifesto and the film.
There's a lot.
That is the reason why he was ahead of a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your input. I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think that I love how his video kind of fits from your interviews, and it also fits into his method of going back to go forward. And I think we're going to also allow other of our brothers and sisters to add or comment or questions that they have for you too also. Do you want to say something, Sandra?
I didn't know the name, but I knew that the story I wanted to hear more about it. But I'm not interested. So, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for now?
Thank you so much. I think Ernest Mancoba is a very unique South African artist. I think in the sense that, so I just wanted to hear about what you think his legacy looks like in the more contemporary current art landscape. I mean, of course, I'm just saying from the kind of interactions that you've had through organizing exhibitions and being in those spaces, what kind of artistic legacy do you see across in those kind of exhibitions?
In the paper, I mentioned that whilst Ernest Mancoba is very distinctive in the way he draws inspiration from Southern African indigenous visual heritage, he's not alone. If you look at some people say Jimmy Feni, inspired by rock art. If you look at the monograph that Bongiwe Kakita wrote about Gladys Ngudlandru, you'll find that she was untrained, so-called untrained, but in fact she learned from her grandmother, who was within the mode of indigenous visual heritage. The Fifi Pladi, highly contemporary artist, works in Stockholm using methods drawn from indigenous visual heritage. Tika and two sculptures, his most recent exhibition of bone sculptures. And my argument really in the paper is that we need to, in order to really theoretically come to terms with what is South African art, we need to theoretically come to terms with those other sources. And in the paper, I argue that we could even call them first system art. So, I think there are many people who are using the knowledge and expressing it in their art. And it often goes back to the same message. It often goes back to the message of want to remembering the ancestors, understanding who we are as human beings, the deep, amazing patrimony that we have with South Africans and as Africans, which we don't take enough care of. But as I said, I think those ideas do still rainbow over us and give us.
I think one of the, so if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go with my question. No. So as I was reading your paper, I kept thinking, because it also speaks to this idea of the contemporary, the state of contemporary art in South Africa and beyond. And I kept comparing, and you also mentioned J.B. Mbeki and how some students didn't necessarily enjoy the Hyenas, which is one of, I mean, a brilliant film full of colors. And I was very shocked that they didn't enjoy the colors, a bit hurt by that. So, but also he has this poignant way of just confusing the audience. I remember showing Tukibuki with watching Tukibuki with some of my friends, and a lot of people started sleeping, and I was a bit hurt by that too, because it's such a beautiful non-narrative way of telling stories. And so it made me think about film, but it also made me think about music and how it seems like music almost does this kind of métissage effortlessly. It feels like there's a Nigerian Alte music, there's Afrobeat, which can be problematized, but there's also so many ways that music kind of morphs, and even when you look at jazz, that is so filled with like a combination of blues and ragtime and all these different rhythms from all over the continent. So it's not even like a body where when you do like a DNA test, you can kind of think, okay, ancestry from there and there. It's like, it's almost like the spirit of the world. And so I wondered if you thought about these artistic expressions as also models to think about the way that we can kind of approach contemporary arts, because I can see that in the paper you're trying to almost like prompt to a new methodology, a new way of thinking about art, and acknowledging the past and the present and almost the non-linearity of time. So yeah, I was wondering what you thought about music and film, where all these things seem, at least to the amateur's eye, seem to be more poignant.
I really love that question. And to go back to Jibril Diop-Mombete, who, by the way, came to Cape Town in '97 and gave a lecture here at UCT, UWC, and so on. And I hosted him, and I showed him the little film I'd made on Ernest Mancoba, and he was very keen to meet him. But more importantly, and then he went to Paris to edit Le Petit Vendors de Soleil, and then he passed away. So I don't think he had a chance to meet him, but he appreciated meeting him in the film. But he said something incredibly profound. He said that African cinema can be to cinema what the mask was to modern art. And there he's very boldly saying that the form and the content, the language of African cinema can show the world. And of course, he's, the deepest meaning of that is he's talking about the humanity that comes from the African spirituality. And then in terms of music, and Abdul-Kader is a veteran of that movement, the FEPASI movement, the Federation of Pan-African Cineasts, which has struggled to make films that express that culture and that knowledge. But in terms of music, I always like to think about the Blue Notes, South African avant-garde jazz band, who kind of really set the world on fire when they went into exile in England, and they also performed in the United States. And what was interesting about them is that they, like Ernest Mancoba, they drew from all the different traditions across language groups in South Africa and took a South African message, an artistic expression, an African expression to a higher level, very much leading in terms of avant-garde and in terms of jazz at that point in time. And I think that is our legacy as South Africans. We've had such a deep bite of colonialism, industrialization, compared to the rest of the continent. But in the process, our artists, our writers, our musicians, not yet our filmmakers, very sad to say, have been involved in this incredible clash. And they've come up and they've said, we're not going to leave behind our values. We're not going to leave behind what we were taught through our grandmother's storytelling. And somehow or other, we're going to find a way to a form which will allow us to express these values and take them forward. And my really big bugbear at the moment, or forever, is that we're doing damage in the knowledge brokering institutions in our society, in the schools, universities, and the media, because they are encouraging silos. A wonderful book has just come out about South African cinema called Projecting Nation, in which Cara Moya Duncan is the author, and she's exploring what's happened to South African cinema since '94. We've gone back into silos. We've developed silos. And the best of South African art is not about silos. The best about South African art is that, as you said, that mixing. And it's our strength as a society, and it's of course the strength of the rest of Africa as well, not just South Africa, but I'm speaking as a South African, because this is the world that I've tried to understand and the world that has challenged me as a human being. What does it mean to be a human being in South Africa? And for example, I mean, some people have been derisive of our statement at the ICJ, our actions at the ICJ, but I see them as falling right in that same tradition of knowledge and attempt to solve problems through negotiation rather than through violence, which in fact it was an interview that Sandile did with Ntongela Masilela, which is so profound. And he speaks about a dialogue that happened between Tia Soga and Sandile, Chief Sandile, not not the Sandile present here. And this must have been in the late 19th century, just as the 100 years of warfare between the British and the Xhosa were coming to an end. And Tiasoga, who was the first black missionary in South Africa and founded a mission station called Mugwali, 100 years before I was born, and just close to where I was born. And of course, I didn't know about him until I was grown up. And so he was one of the first Western educated African people in South Africa. And he said to Sandile, we have to take on this Western education. It's the only way we can carry on the struggle. We've been defeated in battle. Now we have to take on this Western education. And I see that tradition going from Tiasoga, I saw it in Governor Mbeki, I saw it in Ernest Mancoba, and I see it today in Naledi Panto.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I think there's so much to unpack. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but we're getting to the end of the time that we have together, and I was wondering if there's more questions in the room. Yes.
Just one question. I'm excited about the possibility of reviving the spirit of Sparky and other initiatives.
The
You know the
Fespaco?
the film,
Oh.
African filmmakers from different, because that Pan-African space in filmmaking, in my view, still has got more to offer, and so beyond the realms of the country like South Africa. So what is
it okay if we just take a round of questions and then? So, like, can we listen to all the questions we have in the room, and then we're going to give the answers then after that? Amina, did you want to say?
Yeah, actually, that's kind of to pick up on today's question. I was wondering about what you mentioned and both think about the cultural production of movies in English and whether that was then on a larger exposure scene. And if we were to take English away from African cinema, not that it's in every African cultural scene, but what would it mean to dislocate English? What would it mean to marginalize it if we're trying to resolve it? And would that be possible?
Okay. Is that? Oh, okay. Thank you. Then you may answer, and then
first, and then I'll let Abdul go. Just in terms of what we see on Netflix today, I mean, so many films are in indigenous languages, and then the English subtitles. So I don't think that's a problem. It's just a question of subtitling, and I think that it creates very interesting creative possibilities when people speaking their own familiar languages. It creates different rhythms and all kinds of possibilities. And then just before Abdul answers on the question of FEPACI, FEPACI stands for the Federation of Pan-African Cineasts. It was formed in 1960, and its explicit intention was to decolonize the mind. Saying most of Africa at that stage had one liberation, but they felt that political liberation wasn't enough. The mind needed to be decolonized. So picking up on that saying of Marcus Garvey, and I believe that FEPACI is the most successful Pan-Africanist organization ever. I mean, it has representatives in the diaspora, in Black communities in the United States and Europe, and it's not mentioned often when people talk about Pan-Africanism. But in fact, it's had representatives from every country in Africa. Incredible bodies of films have been produced. They're very difficult to get hold of for various reasons, but I really do think it's the most successful Pan-Africanist movement ever. And I'll hand over to Abdul who was very active in FEPACI for many years.
First and foremost, thank you for asking that question in this university, which I have a non-respect for it. But nevertheless, I will answer to your question. You have to understand Mancoba was with another famous African intellectual, Sheikh Anta Diop. I don't know if you know him, Sheikh Anta. They were together in Paris as a refugee, and they started writing a book with another lady who commissioned them before Africa took the independence. And that book is correct. What was the name?
Musée Vivant.
Musée Vivant. If you are at the university, you can look there. And they start talking about the origin of art and the role of art in society. And they highlighted the role of African art as the ancestor of all art expression. At that moment, there was a political tension. Africa was taking independence, and the West was trying to control Africa, and the Soviet Union was trying to invade. And it was at the first Negro, what they call Black and Negro writers in Paris, where they divided the Africans writers into two spheres: Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone, Papophone, Cacophone, whatever it is. And in that moment, the French government put in an asylum the lady who was the editor of that thing. And the Diop book was never, and thesis was never ever recognized that he did in the 1950s. That there's a Mancoba was part of it. But Mancoba lost his citizenship in South Africa. He and his wife was a white woman Dutch. They could not allow him. Had parents, what they call it, dissolved hair. And they said, you married a, what you call a black man, we cannot recognize you. So both of them, they were refugees. And he took only the French nationality in the 60s. Can you imagine that? What happened is that the Pan-African Federation of Filmmakers that you are asking started in the 1960s when Africa was in a moment of liberation and struggle. And the filmmakers at that time would have one specific task: to decolonize the mind of the African. So the African cinema, the cinema was an objective to decolonize the mind. The French didn't allow that. They filled it with it. The British Anglophone, they didn't give a damn about who speaks in Plan or anything. And they said, black man, you are on your own. And the Frenchman tried to say, la patrie. You know what that means. And then they fait passer, what you call Pan-African Federation of Filmmakers, the French Fédération Pan-Africaine de Cinéastes, fait passer. And there is a song called fait passer, fait passer. So don't do this, don't that. But nevertheless, what I'm trying to tell you is that they pushed it at a level that in a 1993 history, at the Congress of the Federal City, that I was there, the French government, through the National Agency of Cinema, mobilized it to take out that article which says the role of the filmmakers to decolonize. And in contribution, what they did, they said simply, African filmmakers, the film that they make in African Francophone filmmakers, they have a dual citizenship. So it's not anymore African, but it's a French. Thanks to a gentleman who's from Burkina Faso called Gaston Caporet decided.
Thank you so much, Abdul. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I can imagine that the conversations over tea afterwards are going to be so. Yes, we can conclude.
Organizing and reviving is an uphill battle. While from Alfonso, there is a trauma. The African Francophone country now, they are suffering the trauma that the French they don't want to interfere in the country. And you will see that now, next to this, FESPACO will not happen. Why? FESPACO was produced. English people, they are in their own. So the African countries, they struggle in their own thing. So that is the reason why African filmmakers will not make a step forward like any African artist, unless they are not serving the Coca-Cola industry, what I call a colonization. I don't call it colonization, but I call Coca-Colization.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Bridget. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing all your deep knowledge about film and just this history class. So I think we're just going to close, and I want to remind our audience that this is our last attire seminar of the quarter. And the next time we are going to be resuming is going to be on the 25th of July. And please stay with us. If you are here on Monday, we have a book launch with Femi Koyade, a very interesting author from Nigeria. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. And we hope that we can continue the conversations further and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.